For 18 years she carried trays through the Dragon King's halls, and no one ever asked her name. The nobles looked past her. The generals looked through her. Even the Dragon King, when he passed, saw only a shadow with steady hands. That suited her perfectly, because the day anyone learned what lived inside her, she would not live to see the next sunrise. So she made herself small. She made herself nothing, and the most dangerous person in the kingdom, went on pouring wine for men who would one day kneel. She did not know that yet, not fully, but the fire did. That night, a nobleman named Lord Merrick Thorne would strike her in front of the entire court. He believed she was no one. He believed the sacred flame answered to crowns and bloodlines, and to him, he would be the last man in the hall to understand his mistake. The scullery smelled of wood smoke and scalded iron. Cold leaked to the stone floor and up through her thin shoes. She breathed slow. She always breathed slow. Outside, the war horns had sounded at dusk. The Dragon King had come home victorious, and the keep of Emberhold had erupted into light and noise. They called her Sera, the few who called her anything. It was not her true name. Her true name had been buried with the people who gave it to her. She lifted a tray of goblets and walked toward the roar of the great hall. The doors opened on a sea of firelight and silk, 1,000 candles, banners the color of blood and gold, the smell of roasted meat and spilled wine, and the particular sharp scent of dragonborn men, like hot stone, before a storm. At the far end, on a throne carved from a single black fang, sat Kalin, the Dragon King. He was younger than the songs made him sound, and harder. His eyes were the deep amber of banked coals. When he looked at the room flinched. Sera kept her own eyes down and moved along the lower tables, refilling cups, vanishing between bodies. She had survived 18 years on exactly this. Be where the work is, be nothing where the eyes are. But tonight the fire inside her was restless. It had been since the horns. It pressed against the inside of her ribs like a second heartbeat, warm and patient, the way it always did before something happened that she would have to hide. She set down a goblet. Her fingers did not shake. Here is the thing the court did not know. The thing she had never once let slip in 18 years. She was not afraid of the fire. She was its keeper. Every morning, before the kitchens woke, in the dark of the cold cellar, she practiced. Not magic. She had no teacher, no scroll, no name for it. She practiced silence. She practiced holding a thing that wanted to be enormous and folding it down to nothing. She had taught herself to count heartbeats, footsteps, the exact distance from the spark to the spill. When a kettle once flared white-hot in her hands, and the wood beneath it turned to ash in the shape of a coiled serpent, she had not screamed. She had calmly scrubbed the table clean and rebuilt the fire, and told the cook a log had popped. She was not a frightened girl with a curse. She was a soldier who had been at war her entire life, alone, against the things she carried. And she had never once lost. That was her secret. The court saw a trembling nobody. The truth was a woman who had spent 18 years learning to be more disciplined than fire itself. She did not know yet why the fire had chosen her. She did not know what she was. Those were the questions she had stopped asking, because the only answers she had ever found ended in a pyre. But she knew this. When it finally got loose, it would not be small. A goblet shattered near the high table. "You, girl," the voice cut across the music. Sera turned. Lord Merrick Thorne stood with wine bleeding down the front of his white doublet. He was a tall man, with a soft, handsome face, gone cruel at the edges. The kind of noble who had never once been told no. His house held the eastern mines. His coin had funded half the war. He was pointing at her. "This wretch spilled on me," he said. Loud enough for the hall. She had not. She had been 4 paces away. But the room was already turning to look. And a room that turns is a room that has already decided. "My lord," she said softly, "forgive me. Let me forgive you." He laughed. He looked around to make sure others were laughing too. Do you know what this doublet cost? More than your mother could earn lying on her back for a year. Some of the nobles chuckled. Sera said nothing. She had learned that the silence cost less than the answer. Nothing to say? Merrick stuck closer. The warmth in her chest pressed harder. They breed you mute in the kitchens, do they? Look at me when I speak. She looked at him. It was a small mistake. There was something in her eyes that was not fear, and a man like Merrick could feel it the way a dog feels. A low sound. Not understanding it, only hating it, his soft face hardened. Insolent, he said, and he struck her. The blow caught her across the cheek and turned her head. The tray fell. Goblets rang against stone. The hall sucked in a breath, more thrilled than horrified, because cruelty was a kind of theater here, and she was only a servant. But Sera felt the count slip. For 18 years, she had held the spark behind a wall built one disciplined breath at a time. The strike did not break the wall. The strike broke her grip on it. It was the oldest law of the thing inside her. It did not answer to anger. It answered to the instant the will let go. Heat bloomed up her spine. The candles along the high table guttered and then stood straight, their flames stretching toward her like grass bending in wind. The hearth at the end of the hall roared once and went silent. Merrick raised his hand again. "Don't," Sera whispered. It was not a plea. It was the last warning he would ever ignore. The fire came out of her. It did not burn the way fire burns. It rose off her shoulders in a slow golden column light without smoke, heat, without rage. And it filled the great hall to the rafters in a single breath. The nobles cried out and fell back. Tables overturned. Somewhere a woman screamed. Across the floor, beneath Sera's feet, the stone began to glow. Lines of light raced outward, symbols, sharp and curling. A script no living scholar could have read. Ancient runes waking up after a very long sleep, and the Dragon King rose from his throne. Kalen lifted his hand the way he had 10,000 times, the way every king of his line had, and he reached for the sacred flame to pull it back into himself. The fire of Emberhold had always answered the crown. It was the crown. The flame did not so much as turn toward him. It hung in the air above Sera, vast and gentle. And then it bent low, and curled around her like something kneeling. The whole court saw it. The fire that had burned for 1,000 years for the kings of the dragon throne ignored the Dragon King, and obeyed a servant girl. The hall went so quiet that Sera could hear the candle wax dripping. She stood in the center of a ring of scorched runes, the gold light fading from her skin. And she understood with cold clarity that there was no scrubbing this clean. No pop blog, no story. 18 years of silence, gone in 9 heartbeats. She had counted them. The Dragon King was staring at her. Not with the rage she expected, with something far more dangerous, recognition. As if he had seen something in that fire he had only ever read about in the oldest, most forbidden records of his house. Seize her. Day. It was Merrick. He had scrambled back against the wall, wine and terror on his face. Now he hid his fear behind law. She commands the king's own fire, he shouted. An abomination. A thief of the crown's birthright. You all saw it. The flame refused his majesty. His finger leveled at her, shaking. There is one law for stolen fire. The trial of the pyre. Let her walk into the dragon flame at dawn. If she is what she claims, the fire spares her. If she is a thief, his voice climbed, hungry now, certain, she burns. A murmur moved through the nobles. It was an old law. A death sentence dressed as fairness. No one accused under the pyre law had walked out of the flame in living memory, because the flame had always belonged to the king and the king decided who it spared. Merrick knew that. He was already smiling. By right of the court, he pressed. I demand it. Sera said nothing. Her mind was moving very fast and very quietly. She was not measuring the fear in the room. She was measuring exits and odds and the precise location of every armed man, and the strange, steady way the Dragon King had not yet spoken. Then Kalen spoke. No. Doe. The word fell like a blade. The hall stilled. "She is under my protection," the Dragon King said. "From this moment, she answers to the throne and to no house. Lord Thorn, you struck a woman of my keep, and the fire of my fathers chose to defend her. That is not her crime. That is my omen to read, not yours." Merrick's smile curdled. "Majesty, the law. The law allows another to stand the trial in the accused place." Kaelin let the words land. "I will stand it." The hall erupted. Sera's breath caught, the first thing all night that had cracked her composure, because she understood what he was offering. A king could enter the pyre in another's place, but a king who did so surrendered the crown's claim to the fire for as long as he lived. He would rule. But the sacred flame, the thing that made the dragon throne, would never again answer his blood. He was offering to give up the birthright of his entire line for a servant whose name he did not know. "Majesty, you cannot," an old general breathed. "The fire is the throne. Without it, I am aware of what it is." Kaelin's amber eyes did not leave Sera. "I have carried it my whole life. I have never once seen it kneel." Something moved across his hard face, quiet, almost wondering. It knelt for her, and in that moment Sera saw the thing the rules of her survival had never accounted for. This man, this king, feared across 3 kingdoms, was looking at her not as a weapon, or a threat, or a thing to be owned. He was looking at her as if she were a person worth losing everything for. No one had looked at her like that in 18 years. It nearly undid her. But Sera had not survived by being undone. She had survived by being the most controlled mind in any room. And this room had just handed her something she had never had before, a choice that was hers to make. In front of every person who had spent her whole life refusing to see her, she stepped forward, into the center of the burned runes, and she let the trembling fall away from her shoulders like a wet cloak hitting the floor. She straightened her spine, she lifted her chin, and when she spoke, her voice was not the small, soft voice of the kitchen. It was low and clear, and it carried to the farthest banner in the hall. "No one stands the trial for me," she said. The Dragon King went still. "You offer your birthright to save my life, Majesty." She met his eyes, and for one heartbeat let him see the woman behind the servant. "I will not let you spend it. The fire did not choose you tonight. It chose me." She turned slowly to face Merrick Thorn, and the cold that came into her face emptied the cruelty out of his. "So I will walk the pyre, at dawn." As accused, Merrick's mouth opened in vicious delight. "But I name my own condition," Sera went on, and the runes beneath her feet flared gold again, answering something in her voice that she had spent 18 years pretending she did not have. "When the dragon flame spares me, and it will the man who struck me kneels." Here, in front of the court that laughed, her voice dropped. "Soft is the moment before a fire takes a house, and if it does not spare me you lose nothing, my lord. You only have to be right." The hall did not breathe. Lord Merrick Thorn stared at the servant girl who had just wagered her own execution to make him kneel. And for the first time in his gilded life, he was not certain he had won. Dawn came gray and cold over Emberhold. The courtyard filled before the sun cleared the walls. They had built the pyre overnight in the great training yard, a circle of black stone 40 paces wide. At its center stood a brazier shaped like an open dragon's mouth. From it rose the dragon flame itself, not the warm gold that had knelt for Sera, but the old hungry fire of the trial, blue-white at its heart. The fire that had burned the guilty for 1,000 years. The court ringed the circle in their furs and finery. They had come for a death. Sera could read it in their faces. The way they leaned and whispered. Lord Merrick stood at the front, restored to his arrogance by a night of council. Certain the law was a wall she could not climb. The Dragon King stood apart, and he was not arrogant at all. Kaelin watched her cross the yard in the plain gray shift they had given her. His jaw was tight. His hands were closed into fists at his sides. He had argued with her until the candles burned out. She had refused him. Now he could only stand and watch the fire decide, and the helplessness in his face was the most honest thing in the whole courtyard. "You don't have to prove anything to them," he had said in the dark hours ago. "I'm not proving it to them," she had answered. "I'm proving it to me." She reached the edge of the black circle. A herald read the charge in a voice that shook. Theft of the crown's sacred fire. Sentence to be passed by the dragon flame. Let the accused enter. "Last chance, girl," Merrick called out. The court tittered. "Beg, and perhaps His Majesty will exile you instead of scattering your ashes." Sera looked at him. She did not answer. She stepped into the circle. The heat hit her like a wall. Up close the trial flame was enormous, a roaring blue-white column twice her height. The noise of it filled the world. She walked toward it slowly, counting her steps the way she always had, and somewhere in the crowd she heard the Dragon King say her borrowed name once. Low and ragged, she stopped an arm's length from the fire, and the fire reached for her. It came off the brazier in a lashing arc, faster than the eye. It struck her full in the chest. The crowd screamed. The flame swallowed her whole. For one terrible moment, there was nothing where the servant girl had stood but a pillar of white fire, and Lord Merrick's laugh rang out high and triumphant over the roar. Inside the fire, Sera staggered. It was worse than anything she had ever held. This was not the patient warmth that had lived behind her ribs for 18 years. This was ancient and starving. It did not recognize her, and it poured into her like a flood into a cracked cup. Her knees buckled. She tasted copper. The discipline she had built over a lifetime bent like a green branch in a storm. And a single thought cut through the agony, cold and clear. It doesn't know me. She had spent 18 years learning to fold fire down into silence. She had never once tried to speak to it. So through the pain on her knees inside the inferno she stopped resisting, and for the first time in her life, she opened her hands and let the thing inside her answer, the thing outside, and the fire heard. In the courtyard, the screaming stopped. The white column went still, and then, slowly, it changed. The hungry blue burned away, and the flame turned gold. The same deep, gentle gold that had knelt in the great hall. The runes that had scorched the stone the night before bloomed again across the entire 40-pace circle, racing under the feet of the nobles, who scrambled back with cries of terror. The fire parted. Sera rose to her feet inside it. The flame curled around her arms like a living thing greeting its keeper. And where it touched her gray shift, it left the cloth untouched. Her skin glowed faintly gold from within, runes shining up through it as if her very blood had been written in the oldest language of the world. She stepped out of the brazier's reach. The trial flame followed her, obedient. Trailing from her hands, she was not burned. She was crowned in fire. The court fell to its knees, not in reverence, but in the plain animal need to be lower than the thing they were looking at. All of them. Generals, ladies. The old men of the high houses, all of them but one. Lord Merrick Thorne stood frozen. Alone. The last man standing in a kneeling court. His triumphant laugh, dead in his throat. Sera walked toward him. The fire walked with her. "You named the law, my lord," she said. Her voice carried with no effort at all now. "The flame has spoken. It found me innocent." She stopped before him. "Now you keep your part." "This is sorcery," Merrick whispered, backing away. "Witchcraft. She has bewitched the fire. She has bewitched the king, His voice cracked. "Someone sees her." No one moved. No one would ever again move on his word. "You struck me," Sera said quietly, "because you were certain no one would ever answer." 18 years, my lord. I let men like you be certain. It was the safest thing I owned." The gold fire brightened along her arms. "You were the one who taught me I no longer needed it." Merrick did the last foolish thing of his life. He drew his sword. He was fast. He had trained since boyhood. The blade came up and around in a killing arc aimed at her throat. The crowd cried out. The Dragon King surged forward. He was not fast enough. Neither of them was. Sera did not move her feet. She lifted one hand. The gold fire met the blade. There was a single ringing note, bright and final. Like a bell struck once, the sword stopped as if it had struck a mountain. And then it simply was not a sword anymore. It sagged, rime molten down its own length, and fell as harmless metal tears onto the black stone between them. Merrick stared at his empty hand. Sera lowered hers. She did not strike him. She did not have to. The fire she had refused to savor as a weapon settled back into stillness, and she looked at the man who had spent a night certain of her death. "Kneel," she said, "and Lord Merrick Thorne, Lord of the Eastern Mines, who had funded a war and struck a servant and demanded a pyre, sank down onto both knees on the cold stone, in front of the entire court that had laughed. It was over. The whole reordering of the world had taken less time than it took the sun to clear the wall. Halen reached her then. He stopped close, searching her face, and the question in his amber eyes was not "What are you?" but "Are you hurt?" And that, more than the kneeling court, more than the obedient fire, was the thing that finally cracked something open in her chest. "I'm not burned," she told him softly. "I know," he said. "I'm still afraid for you." The records gave them the rest over the days that followed. Halen brought her himself to the sealed vault beneath Emberhold, where the oldest scrolls of his house had been locked away so long that even he had only heard rumors of them. They read by the light she made in her own cupped hands, and there, at last, Sera learned what she was. The dragon throne had a secret older than its crown. Before the first Dragon King, before Emberhold's first stone, there had been a people the dragons answered to by choice and not by conquest. The Veil. The first keepers, whose blood the dragons recognized as kin. The kings of Caelan's line had not been given the sacred flame. Long ago they had taken it. When the last of the Veil were hunted to silence, they had spent 1,000 years pretending the fire served the crown. It had never served the crown. It had only been waiting. "You aren't becoming powerful," Caelan said, reading the truth aloud in the vault's dim hush. "You were never not. The fire didn't choose you in my hall. It recognized you." He looked up, and there was no fear in him, only a kind of awe gone gentle. "It's been kneeling to your blood since before my fathers stole the throne. I don't command it. I never did. I only borrowed what was always yours." Sera was quiet for a long moment. "My mother hid me in your kitchens," she said slowly, the pieces falling into place at last. "The last of a hunted line, raised under the roof of the house that hunted us. She didn't teach me what I was. She taught me to disappear. A breath. She kept me alive by making me invisible to the very crown that would have burned me. 18 years of silence. Now she understood every one of them. She might have hated him for it. The throne his family stole. The people hers had been. The pyre his court had built. She turned the choice over in her cold, careful mind. The way she turned over everything. And she found that she did not hate him, because when the whole court had screamed for her death, this man had offered to burn his own birthright to spare a servant whose name he did not know. He had not done it for the fire. He had done it before he knew what she was, when she was still, to his eyes, only a girl who carried trays. That was the answer to the question she had stopped asking long ago. Not "What am I?" but "Who in all the world would stand between me and the flame?" She had her answer. It was Caelan who came for her when the eastern horns finally sounded. Merrick Thorne's broken pride had not stayed quiet. He had fled to the enemy kingdom of Varoth in the night, and he had told them everything, that the dragon throne's fire no longer answered its king. That Emberhold's 1,000-year weapon had gone silent in the crown's hands. He told them the keep was right. He did not tell them where the fire had gone instead. Perhaps he could not bear to. Varas came at dusk with siege engines and 10,000 men, and a thing they had kept caged for 3 generations, a wild dragon, vast and black and half mad. Its mind broken by captivity into a single hunger, they loosed it on the walls of Emberhold, and the walls began to fall. Caelan met it in the air in his own dragon form, gold against black. And the sky burned, but the wild thing was bigger and crueler. It did not feel pain the way a sane creature did. Sera stood on the cracking battlements and watched the king who had offered her everything get driven down out of the sky. Watched him strike the courtyard stone and not rise. Watched the black dragon coil over him to end it. She had a choice, the same choice her mother had made for her 18 years ago. Disappear, survive, be no one, and live, or be what she was. She walked to the edge of the wall. She did not fold the fire down. For the first time in her life, she opened every door inside herself at once, and let the thing she had spent 18 years caging come out to its full and terrible size. Stop, she said to the black dragon. It was not loud, but the fire that had kneeled in the great hall, the fire that had spared her on the pyre, the fire that was older than the kingdom and answered to her blood, and only her blood it heard her. In the wild thing and in the air and in the stone and in the very heart of Emberhold, and every flame in the world turned toward her. The black dragon froze above the fallen king. The madness in its eyes guttered. Sera reached out across the burning courtyard, not to destroy it, but to do the thing her ancestors had done before any crown was stolen. She spoke to it as kin, and she took the broken cage out of its mind, and she set it free. The whale dragon lowered its vast black head, and it knelt to her in the rubble. Beside the king it had been about to kill. The army of Varath broke and ran. You do not lay siege to a keep whose servant girl commands the dragons themselves. She found Kalin in the ruined courtyard, bloodied and breathing, and she knelt beside him in the ash. The gold light from her hands closed the worst of his wounds while he stared up at her. You could have run, he said. I know. I know. Why didn't you? She thought about the boy king who'd offered to walk into the pyre. The man who'd been afraid for her instead of her. The only person in 18 years who had looked at a nobody and seen someone worth losing a throne for. Because you'd have done it for me, she said, when I was no one at all. The court that had laughed at her, the generals who had wanted her burned, the lords and ladies of the high houses, they gathered in the broken courtyard as the sun rose. And one by one they knelt, not because the law made them, because they had finally truly seen her. Kalin rose. He took her hand before all of them, the servant's hand he had once looked past 1,000 times, and he did not place a crown on her head, because the fire had crowned her long before he could. They feared a monster across the eastern border for 100 years, he said. His voice carried over the kneeling court. And all that time the one they should have feared with carrying their wine. He looked at her, and the hardness was gone out of his face entirely now. I will not rule beside the fire. I'll rule beside the woman it chose, if she'll have a king who has nothing left to offer her but himself. Sera, who had been invisible, who had been mocked, who had been noticed and protected and needed, looked at the man who had been all of that and asked for nothing in return. That, she said softly, is the only thing I ever wanted that I couldn't take for myself. And the fire rose gold around them both, gentle as a kept promise, and for the first time in 18 years she let the whole world learn her name. If this story pulled you in the girl everyone overlooked, the king who'd have burned his own throne for her, the moment that fire finally knelt then, do me a small kindness and let me know. Tap that like button so more people find their way to stories like this one. Share it with someone who loves a quiet underdog who turns out to be the most powerful soul in the room. And if you want more tales of forbidden bloodlines, dragon kings, and the overlooked ones who rise, subscribe to the channel and ring that bell so you never miss a new story the moment it goes live. Thank you for staying to the very end. I'll see you in the next one.